When Katt Williams was visiting a friend at the hospital, he noticed an elderly man sitting, alone in the cancer ward, staring out the window with no visitors, no flowers, no cards. What Katt discovered about this forgotten patient would break his heart and change both their lives forever. The afternoon sun filtered through the windows of Cedars-Sinai Medical Center in Los Angeles as Katt Williams made his way down the familiar corridor toward room 628. He'd been coming here every few days for the past 2 weeks to visit his longtime friend and fellow comedian Jerry Washington, who was recovering from emergency heart surgery. The routine had become almost meditative for Katt. Park in the visitor's garage. Take the elevator to the 6th floor. Stop by the gift shop for magazines or snacks. Then spend an hour or two keeping Jerry's spirits up with stories from the road and gentle ribbing about his doctor's orders to eat healthier. But today, as Katt walked past the open doors of the oncology wing, something made him pause. Through the doorway of room 614, he caught a glimpse of an elderly man sitting alone by the window, his thin frame silhouetted against the afternoon light. What struck Katt wasn't just that the man was alone. Hospitals could be lonely places, and not everyone had family nearby. It was the complete absence of any signs that anyone cared. No get-well cards taped to the walls, no flowers on the windowsill, no balloons tied to the bed frame. The room looked as sterile and impersonal as the day the man had been admitted. The old man, who appeared to be in his late 70s, sat perfectly still in his hospital gown, staring out at the Los Angeles skyline with an expression of profound solitude. His white hair was thin and neatly combed, and despite his obvious illness, he maintained a dignified posture that spoke of a lifetime of self-respect. Katt found himself slowing his pace, then stopping entirely in the hallway. Something about the scene tugged at his heart in a way he couldn't quite explain. Maybe it was remembering his own grandmother's final days, when family had gathered around her bed sharing stories and holding her hand. Or maybe it was simply the recognition that no one should face their final chapter completely alone. After visiting Jerry and sharing the usual jokes and encouragement, Katt found himself walking back past room 614. The elderly man was still there, still staring out the window, still surrounded by emptiness. This time, Katt knocked gently on the doorframe. "Excuse me," he said softly. "I hope you don't mind the interruption. I'm visiting a friend down the hall, and I couldn't help but notice you sitting here. Thought maybe you could use some company." The old man turned slowly, his eyes taking a moment to focus on his unexpected visitor. When he saw Katt, his expression showed mild surprise but no recognition. "I don't get many visitors," the man said, his voice soft but clear. "Are you sure you have the right room?" "I'm exactly where I want to be," Katt replied, stepping into the room. "My name's Katt. Mind if I sit down?" The elderly man gestured to the chair beside his bed. "I'm Walter Morrison. Please, have a seat. Though I have to warn you, I'm not very good company these days." Katt settled into the chair and looked around the sparse room. "How long have you been here, Mr. Morrison?" 3 weeks tomorrow," Walter replied. "Pancreatic cancer. The doctors are very honest about these things. They don't expect me to see Christmas." The matter-of-fact way Walter delivered this devastating news hit Katt like a punch to the chest. Here was a man discussing his own death with the same casual tone someone might use to comment on the weather. "And you don't have any family who can be here with you?" Katt asked gently. Walter was quiet for a moment, looking back out the window. "I had a wife for 52 years. Margaret. She passed 2 years ago. We never had children, tried for years, but it wasn't meant to be." He paused, his hands folding carefully in his lap. "I have a nephew in Oregon, but we haven't spoken in probably 10 years. Different politics, different values. He thought I was too set in my ways." "What about friends? People from work?" "I was a high school English teacher for 40 years, Walter said with a slight smile. "Retired 15 years ago. Most of my colleagues have either passed away or moved to be closer to their own families. You lose touch with people over time, especially when you get to be my age." Katt felt his throat tighten. This man had spent his entire career educating young people, probably touching hundreds of lives, and now he was facing his final days in complete isolation. "Tell me about your teaching," Katt said. "What was that like?" Walter's eyes brightened slightly. "Oh, it was wonderful. Challenging, frustrating, rewarding, all at the same time. I taught at Lincoln High in South Central for my entire career. Tough neighborhood, but those kids..." He trailed off, lost in memory. "They were special?" Every single one of them was special, even the ones who didn't think so themselves. Walter turned to look at Katt directly. You know what I loved most? When a kid who'd been struggling all semester would suddenly understand something. Poetry, usually. You'd see it in their eyes. That moment when the words stopped being just words and became something that spoke to their soul. Katt leaned forward, genuinely interested. Any students who particularly stood out? Oh, hundreds. There was Maria Santos, who wrote the most beautiful essays about her grandmother's immigration story. She's a journalist now, works for the LA Times. And Jerome Williams, Walter chuckled. That boy could barely sit still for 5 minutes, but when I introduced him to Maya Angelou's poetry, he memorized entire poems and would recite them during lunch. Do you ever hear from any of them? Walter's expression grew wistful. Not for years. They move on with their lives, start families, build careers. That's as it should be. But sometimes I wonder if I made any real difference. Katt was quiet for a moment, thinking about all the teachers who had influenced his own life. Mr. Morrison, can I tell you something? I never finished high school, dropped out to pursue comedy. But I had this one English teacher, Mrs. Rodriguez, who told me that stories matter, that making people think and feel was important work. She probably doesn't even remember me, but her words changed my life. Walter smiled, the first genuine smile Katt had seen from him. What do you do now? I'm a comedian. I perform stand-up, act in movies sometimes. Ah, so you did become a storyteller after all. Mrs. Rodriguez would be proud. They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, watching the late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the city below. Mr. Morrison, Katt said finally, would you mind if I came back to visit you again? Maybe tomorrow? Walter turned to him with surprise. You'd want to do that? I'd be honored to do that. If you'll have me, Yes, I'd like that very much. The next day, Katt returned with a small stack of books, classic poetry collections and short story anthologies. Walter's face lit up when he saw them. I thought maybe you could recommend some of your favorites, Katt said. Help me understand what made those students of yours fall in love with literature. For the next hour, Walter shared passages from Langston Hughes, Maya Angelou, and James Baldwin, his voice growing stronger and more animated as he talked about the power of words to capture human experience. You know what's funny, Walter said as their visit was winding down. I've been feeling sorry for myself, sitting here alone, thinking my life didn't matter. But talking with you about teaching, about books and ideas, I remember why I loved it so much. Katt visited every day for the next 2 weeks. Sometimes they read together. Sometimes Walter shared stories from his decades in the classroom, and sometimes they just sat quietly watching the city below. Katt brought Jerry by to meet Walter, and soon the older man had 2 regular visitors. But it was during their conversations that Katt learned the most remarkable thing about Walter Morrison. Despite facing his own mortality alone, despite having no family to comfort him, Walter remained endlessly curious about other people. He asked Katt detailed questions about comedy, about the craft of making. People laugh, about the responsibility that came with having a platform. You know, Walter said one afternoon, teaching and comedy aren't so different. Both require understanding your audience, knowing how to read a room, finding ways to connect with people who might not want to listen. I never thought about it that way, Katt replied. The best teachers are performers, and the best comedians are educators. You make people laugh, but you also make them think about things differently. One day, Katt arrived to find Walter looking weaker than usual. The doctors had adjusted his medication, and he was sleeping more. But when he woke up and saw Katt sitting beside his bed, he smiled. I have something to tell you, Walter said softly. Yesterday I had a visitor. Katt raised his eyebrows in surprise. Really? Jerome Williams. Remember I told you about him? The boy who loved Maya Angelou? The one who memorized the poems? That's him. He's a teacher now, would you believe it? He works at the same school where I taught. Somehow he heard I was here. Walter's eyes filled with tears. He said he's been looking for me for years, wanted to thank me for introducing him to poetry. He said it changed his life. Katt felt his own eyes getting misty. That's incredible. He's coming back today with some of his students. Wants them to meet me. Walter paused, wiping his eyes. 40 years of teaching, and I never knew if I'd really reached anyone. Now I know. When Jerome arrived that afternoon with 3 of his students, Katt watched from the hallway as Walter transformed, surrounded by young people eager to hear his stories about literature and life. The elderly man seemed to grow stronger before Katt's eyes. "Mr. Morrison," one of the students said, "Mr. Williams told us you used to have your students write about their dreams. Can you tell us about that?" Walter spent the next hour sharing his teaching philosophy, encouraging the students to find their own voices, reminding them that their stories mattered. It was like watching a master craftsman return to his workshop one final time. After the students left, Walter was exhausted but glowing. "You know what you did?" he asked Katt. "What do you mean?" "By spending time with me, by listening to my stories, you reminded me who I was. And somehow, that brought Jerome back into my life." Walter reached out and took Katt's hand. I was ready to disappear quietly, feeling like my life hadn't mattered. "But you showed me that it did." Walter Morrison passed away peacefully 2 days later, surrounded by Jerome, 3 former students, Katt, and Jerry. His final words were about the power of connection, about how no one is ever really alone as long as someone cares enough to listen to their story. At Walter's funeral, over 200 former students attended. One by one, they shared stories about how he had influenced their lives, how his encouragement had shaped their paths, how his belief in the power of words had given them confidence to find their own voices. Katt spoke at the service, telling the crowd about the man he'd met sitting alone by a hospital window, and how sometimes the most profound gifts we can give someone are simply our time and attention. Walter Morrison spent 40 years proving that every person has a story worth telling, Katt said. In his final weeks, he taught me that every person also has a story worth hearing. Sometimes the most important thing we can do is sit down, listen, and remind someone that their life has meaning. After the service, Jerome approached Katt. "Thank you for being there for him. He told me how much your visits meant to him." "He gave me more than I gave him," Katt replied. "He reminded me why human connection matters." As people began to leave the cemetery, Katt thought about all the Walter Morrisons, sitting alone in hospital rooms, nursing homes, and apartments around the world. People with rich histories and important stories, waiting for someone to care enough to listen. Sometimes the most meaningful performances happen not on stage, but in quiet moments when we choose to see the value in another person's life. And sometimes a simple conversation can transform both the storyteller and the listener, proving that no one's story ever really ends as long as someone remembers it with love.